figure into a circular economy, even though they are expected to perform much of the hard work required to recycle and reuse textiles today. Another thing that surprised us is how little data is collected and shared within the industry. We found gaps in data and a lack of tracking metrics and cooperation that could provide a more formal analysis like other large industry use. For example, of the top 10 industries employing data science, none are associated with textile apparel recycling in the US. So this is actually one of our suggestions that comes out of the white paper. We need to find a way to start capturing this basic data and then use it strategically like other categories, such as banking, healthcare, and manufacturing. There's a third surprise, for me anyway, when we went to look at the story of what the future holds for the next era in textile recycling businesses in the United States. The surprise is that even the most advanced textile recycling today still requires people to collect, sort, and process textile waste into usable grades. And this work is done by hand, and manual sorting will continue into the foreseeable future. And now you may be thinking, but don't they have a machine to do that? And the answer is, well, kind of. But even the most sophisticated textile sorting platforms on the market today still require initial hand sorting by people, which was confirmed through our stakeholder interviews. Another of our participants put it this way: no machine can do what the human eye can do. And if I had all the money in the world, I would still continue to use human beings. I wanted to talk briefly about why we wrote this white paper. First of all, as our research made clear, there's not enough information out there about how workforce dynamics figure into the circular economy. What resource is more valuable than a human one? Yet within the topic of circular economics, the other earth resources like water and petroleum take up a majority of the conversation. So this white paper will hopefully give support for putting people and workers into that conversation when we talk about the circular economy. Another reason we wanted to do the white paper is to try and answer the question, how big is the opportunity here? Will emerging textile-to-textile recycling technology truly change the textile recycling landscape? And the answer to that question is definitely positive. And we're hoping the white paper will help spread the word to businesses and investor communities who want to get involved early in this exciting opportunity. So the white paper is available now, not only to business people, but anyone interested in the subject. There's not a lot of workforce creation publications out there specifically about the recycled and reused textile industry. So we're now looking at the white paper as a resource in that sense. And I'd like to talk about what we learned from this project in terms of the major themes and suggestions we have for the industry going forward. We actually identified 6 key areas for taking action, which is in the closing section of the paper. And these suggestions are based on making the most impact with the resources we have available now. First of all, the simplest way to put more people into recycling jobs is to collect more post-consumer textile waste. In Germany, for example, they collect up to 75% of unwanted textiles. In the United States, that number is something like 23%. So this is low-hanging fruit, so to speak. By collecting and transforming this textile waste into valuable products, we also help put a stop to our role in the landfill madness that is going on here and overseas. The white paper also recommends that we focus recycling efforts on large cities. So much depends on feedstock volume when it comes to the whole concept of profitability. Cities and surrounding communities are gold mines for unwanted textiles. Getting the message out and using existing infrastructure and other assets for collections is easier to accomplish in urban areas where people are concentrated. Another action item concerns cooperation in data collection. Workforce creation requires collaboration between many stakeholders, such as local and state governments, business owners, nonprofits, and even entrepreneurs with new ideas for textiles and related technologies. Standardized reporting in the textile industry can help build data assets that can guide decision-making as we move forward. And before we move on to our panel and your questions, I'm going to reference a quote shared by a stakeholder in our survey. The interview question was about hand sorting, the kind of tough manual work that is an essential part of textile reuse and recycling businesses. The stakeholder said, and I quote, "I would say this is a high skill type of job that requires a lot of experience. It is not necessarily a high wage job for whatever reason." Here, in a nutshell, is the major challenge for us working in textiles and recycling. Yes, we have a high-tech future to look forward to with well-paying engineering type jobs that go along with it, but we will continue to depend on manual workers for making that future into a reality. The white paper makes it clear that it's important to no longer assume we can find good workers willing to do hard jobs for low wages. Our industry must create good jobs in order to attract good workers to do them. Thanks. Back to you, Carla.
Great, Shelley. So Lindsay, if you could put the screen up so we get to see all the panelists, that would be great. And we're going to start the panel discussion now by having a conversation around what we've learned. Obviously, both Tony and Luke were, their organizations were involved in this panel. I would like to kick this off by saying, that while, to the point that Shelley made earlier, that while everybody's interested in circularity, we focus so much on the environmental side of it, and we need this research also on social. It's really important. I've read a book recently which has really made a big impact on me, and it talked about if we wanted to do something environmentally beneficial, the first thing we could do is pay people, because people don't have, services don't have greenhouse gas impacts, right? So if we spend those dollars on people, that's a great way to do things. So I'd like to kick off our panel discussion with asking both Tawny and Luke about being key stakeholders in the circular textile economy, and what are the changes that you're seeing in your area. And we've picked Luke and Tawny specifically because Tawny's really working in that collecting sorting segment, while Luke is working in the recycling segment. So Tawny, if we could start with you, it'd be great to have your comments on this.
Thank you, and thank you for including me in this conversation. I do think it's a fascinating area that we aren't talking about, and I think that this paper is going to become very useful for many people in the future as well as a reference. So appreciate that. The workforce we're finding, like through COVID, there's been a number of changes, and we've been fine-tuning the work that we've been doing and doing a better job of it. But at the end of the day, our primary workforce, we have almost 2,000 employees that are involved in the thrift sector within the Salvation Army. They are lower income, lower wage positions, and that has become a great challenge with us recently, because there is so much competition from other businesses for these people, and people are not necessarily wanting to do this harder labor. So it is a very manual labor, sorting and organizing. We're looking forward to potentially putting mechanisms in place to make things more efficient, but that's expensive as well as, and for sorting and optical sorters and those sorts of things. They're not necessarily, as a charity, we're not really at a position to start including those things. But I think one of the main assets that we see potentially in the future is having policymakers and the federal government, provincial governments understanding that we can divert more from landfill. We can use those textiles, but we're going to need some help with paying our labor, because labor takes up 55% of our costs in the business processes that we do, and our margins are so slim. So that's a consideration and something that makes it a challenge for us.
That's great. Love it when you talk about those numbers. You know, that's one of those data pieces that's so important, you know, that 55% is actually in your labor force. And Luke, from a recycler's perspective, what are you seeing when it comes to, you know, the changes in the workforce, or what your needs are as a new company and what your expectations are?
So we're definitely seeing, you know, as a purpose-driven company, that's a very big, strong pull point for bringing in potential staff members for us, because we're looking to grow at the moment. And so we're going into an active recruiting cycle. We've been impressed with what we're seeing, but there's also, you know, there's a lot of competition out there for key people, and sustainability and circularity have become such hot topics that you'll see a lot of people putting this on their resume. A lot of companies starting to put out jobs out there that they want a head of sustainability, or they want various people in their sustainability divisions. And so the labor pool that you're competing for, people with, you know, good experience, you know, that competition is definitely growing. We sit in a slightly different scenario in that we're looking for people with textile engineering backgrounds, with fiber production backgrounds and things like that. But the challenge there is a lot of those industries actually went overseas. So some of those core skills, it's tricky because there really aren't visas or anything to support bringing some of these skills back, so that we can train up a more active local, you know, labor force as we look to scale.
That's a really, you know, the next question that we talked about, you know, the next conversation includes, you know, this idea of, you know, the policies that might affect this. But I want to just take a moment to also, Shelley, you know, when you see from the work that you did, right, from all the research overall, you know, was there some sort of key changes that you felt like needed to be, you know, brought up?
Yeah, and what both Tawny and Luke talked about, we found in our stakeholder surveys, what a lot of the conversation was about the actual wage, and this is probably more lower paid, and the competition post-COVID, and that the two drivers that can help that situation, of course, is always paying more. And then mission-driven companies, that people want to work for companies that have a mission.
Great.
If I may, sorry,
Sure.
I just wanted to add something that I really loved how Luke framed that around the sustainability. And I think that if we can start to reposition the work that's happening within thrift and within textile reuse and repurposing as a sustainable act more so, we're working on that in our marketing campaigns. But we are actually a sector in sustainability that people don't really understand and don't realize that we are. So if we can start using that language internally within our own marketing, with our other charity organizations that we're often working hand in hand, I think that might be a great way for people to want to get engaged in this industry and understanding they are making a difference. So again, going to that mission, they're making an environmental difference. Of course, Salvation Army, we've got a whole background of helping others, but this environmental difference that you can do by working in these organizations, and this is a sustainability practice that our companies are doing, is a message that we don't often deliver. And I think that's a great takeaway for us to be able to embed into our culture.
Actually, that's really a great point, and I'm glad that it's sort of bubbling up, because when we think about you know, sustainability, right, and this transition that we're looking at now, one of the things that, you know, we've seen in our work at Accelerating Circularity is we have forever talked about the textile value chain, if we want to call it that, versus textile supply chain, but we haven't included the collecting, the sorting, the pre-processing, right? It's really been a sector that's been outside of the textile industry. And so it doesn't get touched with that airbrush of, you know, sustainability and, you know, part of the fashion industry and this kind of thing. So I think that that's really something that we need to do. We actually, in some of the work that we've done, have made a call that we need to embrace this segment, right? Because it's going to be necessary. And there are changes that this segment has to go through to participate with us. So if we were to talk about that, what would be your goals, right? If we're looking at developing the workforce, what would be the goals that you would like to see happen? Maybe Luke, you can kick that one off.
I think I touched on it earlier, but I think basically building up training programs, bringing experienced mentors in from wherever to basically help build core skills that we're going to need for this industry. The point about textile sorting, even at a manual level, is people need to know what they're actually sorting. It's not something you'll see. Experienced people, they can touch a fabric and they know what's in it. That's to that whole human element, something that a machine can't necessarily identify. I mean, they're supplementing this with near field infrared and all these automated sorting technologies that they're working on. But, ultimately you need to train people. If you have someone who's going to operate specialized fiber making equipment, for example, you need people who deeply understand that equipment. That equipment doesn't really exist very much anymore. Yeah, you've got to bring people back who can, you've got an entire textile industry that largely was shipped overseas, and we need to rebuild some of that because it makes very big, strong sustainability sense to actually nearshore a lot more of your stuff. Because right now, if you look at one of the biggest sustainability aspects here is we spend so much time just shipping stuff around the world. We need to bring more people back and do more locally.
That's a great point. No. I mean, I think those are really important. And one of the things that I would say when you were talking about, training people, I mean, even that sorting that's done today, the conversations that we've had, I've talked to people that training to teach people to manually sort takes between 6 months to a year. I mean, Tawny, you could probably speak to that. And if that's the case, that's a skill level that's required, right? And you don't want to lose a person. You don't want to cycle through people at that level. And then the other thing is when you talk about mechanization might eventually be able to figure out the fiber blends, right? I know that there's work being done there, but they're never going to tell if there's a stain on a product, right? Which makes it unusable because, the way things get sorted is typically for reuse, and then the other sector that's available for recycling. So only a human eye can say, oh, there's a stain, there's a rip. And also another thing that, a machine's probably not going to be able to say is how big something is. And embarrassingly in the United States and maybe also Canada, the size of people in some instances is large. And those products aren't good for resale, especially internationally. So those are all things that mean that the human eye isn't going to, is that necessary part, as Shelley was speaking of earlier. Tawny, what's your thoughts here?
You're absolutely correct that it takes a certain amount of training. So our production staff, as we call them, who accept these donations and sort through them and decide what is going to be saleable and what is going to be sent down to the other markets and through the other downstream, we call that. They spend a lot of time learning that craft. It's interesting that fortunately we have a lot of employees that have been with us for many, many years. And once they get good at this, we love to be able to keep them. But there is also that point of, we can only pay them so much, and unfortunately we might tend to lose them. It's, again, I go back to the fact that we need financial support to be able to support this sector. It's just not possible for us to keep going through staff like crazy and be able to offer items for sale in our stores. Typically, by the time we go through the collection process, the sorting process, tagging it and putting it on the floor, we're at almost $1 per item on costs. And as I mentioned earlier, 55% of that is labor. So then we have our other overhead, of course, our trucking and our facilities and our store and that sort of thing. But that is something that we really need to get those margins down, because we can't keep raising the prices of these clothings, because the more thrifts that are opening up, the more the competition is, our margins become slimmer and slimmer. I don't have an answer for what the future brings in that regard. I don't believe personally that within the next 3 to 5 years, it's going to be any type of mechanization, because as you mentioned, there's far too many nuances of sizing, of style, like even regional style, like we might have in Thunder Bay. They love to get all the plaid t-shirts and workwear in those areas. But if some of you are familiar with Thunder Bay, it's more northern and rural. And then if we go into Toronto, of course, it's the higher fashion and they don't want those types of things. So, how do you develop a system? That's a local eye, that's a local expertise that's in our production teams that are able to do that. And those things are constantly changing. I'm not sure if I really answered your question as much as just discovered more of our difficulties that we have sometimes internally. You're muted, sorry.
Yeah, that's good, because we're also, one of the things that we did want to bring up are what are the challenges, right? And those are the challenges, and that's really important. But I think, okay, if you have these goals, I think you made it quite clear, Tawny, that you would like to see some sort of intervention to support the pricing. I think, Luke, you talked about needing policy, right, that would provide visas that would allow people to come in and work. Shelley, and if you had some goals, right, after doing this research, what would you say is things that you would really like to see happen? What does the perfect world look like?
Yeah, I think what's super interesting is how important sorting is to the success and profitability, and what a challenge that is, because it's high skill, low paid. And how do we sort of kickstart that and jump that? Is it policy? Like, what levers can we play? And it has such an impact on the cost that I think we really need to look into that even more. I mean, those are the things that come top of mind to me. And then, of course, focusing where that work should happen around urban centers. And if you onshore, that's where sort of waste, for lack of better language, is being created. So I think there's lots of opportunity.
So go ahead, Luke.
There was something interesting, Tony, that you mentioned that made me think, it's almost like this diversion from landfill that's happening from thrift stores is not necessarily being recognized as diversion from landfill. And so, the fees we pay for waste collection, it's almost like that should also, an amount of that budget, you should almost be paying more for your waste collection, and some of that should be going to landfill diversion.
I think I hear angels singing.
I know. I'm just thinking of functional mechanisms that like ways in which it should be positioned to think about, like, what almost budgets. This is my former CFO hat going on here, and thinking about how do we functionally make this happen. Is maybe you think about a big metropolitan area like Toronto, and you think about what they pay to landfill waste, and you think about, okay, this is stuff we kept out of landfill. If you paid that equivalent per ton to us, this would really help us do X.
So that's a really great point, Luke. I love this. This is a great conversation. So I'm sorry, I don't have the numbers for the cost of landfilling in Toronto or Canada, but I can tell you the average across all of the United States, the cost of landfilling is about just above $54 a ton. In the United States, we landfill about 17 million tons a year of textiles, right? So that's about $700 million. So that would be a pretty nice subsidy to the collecting and sorting industry. I will also tell you this, that today, the numbers that when we look at textile waste figures, they don't even include what goes and is sorted through charities, through for-profit collectors. So in addition to the 17 million tons that go into landfill incineration, there's all the material that goes to charities, that go to for-profit collectors, in addition to another million tons of materials that we export to developing nations. So you're absolutely right. And I think that we need to be looking at those things.
That's a great segue, actually, Carla, to a project that we're working up in here in Canada with several partners. We are on the cusp of launching a economic impact and environmental, social impact and environmental impact study of thrift and reuse in Canada, which is going to be a game changer. There was a small one that was done actually in the Maritimes recently by the After Association. Unfortunately, the After Association, which was the Association for Charitable Textile Recycling in Nova Scotia, has since disbanded. Just didn't have enough bench strength to continue that work, but we are doing that work within the NACTR Association, sorry for all the acronyms, which is the National Association for Charitable Textile Recycling. And we're working together with the National Zero Waste Council and with several other consulting agencies to put together this study. So if we can quantify and measure what the charitable sector is doing with thrift, and we figure our early numbers, it's about $1.5 billion a year industry in Canada. It's never been captured. It's never been studied. But once we have that metric and we can share that with others, now we can get people on board, government, bureaucrats, other people, to understand what we are doing and how we are affecting the environment, and that we're only taking 15% of the textiles right now. And if we grow out of landfill, and if we grow that to 30%, we can double all of that impact and triple, and so on and so on. So it's all about data and metrics, and we've always are having these conversations. I see Shelley is shaking her head. Yeah, it's always about that. We don't have that information. We are thrilled to be going into this this project to hopefully get some of that, and then really help boost forward our entire industry so that we've got those metrics to share back and lean into, and then come back to the waste sectors and say, okay, how are we going to make a difference? And when they start seeing the actual carbon offsets and the carbon footprints that we've, that work that we're doing, we do a very poor job in charities of celebrating that. I like to say in Salvation Army, we're soup, soap, and socks. Like, that's what we're good at, right? Like helping people and giving them but we're not really good at some of those other areas. And that's why the NACTR Association is so great, because it's getting all those charities to work together to get that combined message out and to share what our environmental impact is, and for people to understand our work is actual diversion from landfills, and it's environmentally huge, and the sustainability word is actually what we do. So I'm really excited about that. Can you tell?
I mean, that's fantastic, because, the next question was really, how does our work fit into sustainability? I mean, I think that we talked about the fact that, it's easier to see certain elements going into sustainability. And I want to remind everybody, as we're talking about this, for so long, we use the term sustainability, and I think it's really important to be clear on that definition. And that definition of sustainability, I like to go back to the Brundtland report that says, it is maintaining, being able to deliver the needs of society today without negatively affecting those in the future. And that means economically, socially, and environmentally, right? We pay obviously first attention to the economics, then it's pretty shiny penny and easy to talk about, maybe easier to talk about the environmental, and then it gets much more difficult when we talk about the social. And I would even mention that, today, and the number of people that signed up for this webinar versus if we talk about it from an environmental perspective, those numbers change exponentially, right? We've got less people that want to focus on this other area. So Luke, you mentioned it earlier about the industry's sustainability journey, and how you see the workforce that you need fitting into sustainability. I think maybe Tony, you sort of answered that question already.
You mean, how does this, well, fundamentally, I think the key thing here is we need to stop the stuff going into landfill. Right now, we are just generating mountains and mountains and mountains of waste. And, it is very problematic waste. It has a lot of downstream applications as well, environmental applications, not just from the pure bearing aspect. So I think, to process 17 million tons is going to take a lot of people. That's functionally, it's a reality. You just think about the sheer number of jobs you're going to need to create a decent circular economy. And that's just the textiles, right? But the circular economy is so much broader. We're trying to recover all resources and recover everything and go zero waste to landfill. That's a lot of people you need involved in this industry. So I see it as a huge potential growth sector for jobs globally.
Great. Shelley, how would you weigh in on that?
So in the research, it was really kind of quite shocking that the workforce is not considered part of circular economic theory. And I think that we really need to work on that and change that. And to your point, Luke, there is a lot of jobs that are going to be needed to fix that.
So I think, we had another question about data that we wanted to talk about, or the lack of it. The study found that there's a lack of it. I think Tawny's, mentioned that they're doing work to gather it. What are things, I'm going to go back to you, Luke, what are things that you think we can do to start gathering the data that we need to make the impact with, investors, with government, with other members of the supply chain, so we can give, I see data as creating the information that would, transform people's ideas of what we need to do. How do we get such a great concept on the whole, waste dollar amount and going to landfill? You have more for data gathering?
It's tricky because no one wants to really talk about how much waste they have. It's not a topic where you're like, hey, guess what? We produce mountains and mountains of waste. So it's tricky to nail down how much waste is actually out there and where it's actually going, and what it's made out of. One of the big things here for us as a recycler is we process polycotton garments. So we need things with polyester and cotton in them. But knowing just how much is out there that's actually polycotton in a meaningful way. I mean, I know ACP has done a whole lot of work on this, and there's a lot of estimation and work that you guys have done, but this understanding the profile of the waste and the quantity of waste and where it currently sits and who's handling it would be amazing data.
That's a nice, concise recommendation. So we're running out of time. We want to have some time for Q&A, but so let's maybe take one last opportunity and be able to let the people who are participating here, if there's one message that you would like to leave people with, what would that be? And Tawny, I'm going to start with you.
Contribute to the conversation and help us to move it forward, and promote data collection. And that I think is the starting foundation that we need to move all of these things forward. And I've got a database of all of these types of papers, and every time they become so useful as we're moving that forward. And we look at all different areas. And I think that it's really great that they've highlighted jobs and employment in this way, because it's something that I'm hoping to fold into that that study that we're going to be doing as well.
Great. Shelley.
I hope that everybody downloads and reads the paper and that it becomes a resource for business policymakers.
Great. And you, Luke?
I was thinking about how I could see this being something that needs to be front of mind for policymakers and for thinking about how this industry is being built largely, by charities or by, companies, but there's so much social good and so much of the core social contract that is covered here that it needs more policy focus and support.
I'd agree. I think that's a really great point to end on. And then if we can open this up to conversations, one of the things that's really nice, we're a relatively small group here. And so I think it gives us the opportunity to really have a conversation with people who are in the audience and have questions. So please let us know, raise your hand and we'll call on you. If you have questions about the report, or if you have questions for any of us on the panel, Tawny, Luke, Shelley, myself, it's, we find that these conversations are often really helpful between people. So please let us know if you have questions. Either that or I can start calling on people and get your impressions. Because one of the things that I would say about all of these conversations and about circularity is we have a very strong belief that it's critically important that everybody weighs in, they share their expertise. At Accelerating Circularity, we joke, everybody's got to do the work together. So Sabine, your hand is raised. And you're on mute. So if you can unmute yourself and then ask your question, that'd be great.
Hi, I would like to know, do we have an estimate how many workers are missing in this field, or how many jobs a recycling industry in the US or in Canada would create? Can we estimate the numbers?
Shelley, do you want to answer that? You're shaking your head no.
Yeah, so one of the things that we discovered in doing the research for the white paper, that piece of data is missing. Yeah, so in the United States, the EPA tracks recycling, but it doesn't break it out between sectors. And that the last update to that data set was 2012. So there's a lot of opportunity across the board when it comes to data.
And were you able to make kind of a breakdown what kind of jobs would be created? Were you able to kind of, specify more, it's the technology knowledge, which Luke said, the textile knowledge, or it's really more the learning and training by sorting? Did you have a chance to break this more down in the skills required, or?
Yeah, not necessarily, because there was no data to support it. And our learnings, or what we thought was the opportunity, was really around just collecting more and data collection. So that it's not available here in the United States, that data.
What I would also say, Sabine, and I think maybe Tawny might be able to address this a little bit, is there are certain sectors, and maybe even Luke, that they know what they need, but aggregated data for those specific sectors is what's difficult. Tawny, did you want to weigh in on that?
I was actually going to say quickly, sorry, just jumping in there. Sorry, Tawny, is, it also will vary so strongly between different groups. Like if I think about what we're looking for as key people at the moment, it's very heavily engineering focused. Because it's all about scale up of the engineering and doing the engineering work around, putting down these full scale facilities. But each of these facilities will need, loads of, an entire workforce of their own. So that's where we would get more into a different range of labor. But I mean, I'm looking engineering, chemical engineering. I'm looking at, you know, corporate development professionals. I'm looking at, you know, a whole textile developers, you know, fiber specialists. These are the types of roles that I'm looking for now, but that differs from, you know, what Tani would be looking for example.
Yeah, but for example, I'm teaching at a college and we have a lot of students coming from India with a textile engineering background. And they're ending up in a way in the fashion program because they think this has something to do a little bit with textiles, but it actually doesn't have. But they can't find jobs in textile engineering in Canada. So
They need to move to the United States.
maybe they are too, maybe they are too
this,
early, you know, maybe they are too early on the market, but it's kind of crazy that they are actually coming with this background and we can't really find jobs for them, even they have this very specific textile knowledge.
So the key thing here is that it's actually, you know, for the United States, even if they came to the United States, Carla, you can't get them visas. So like, you know, it becomes incredibly problematic because there are so many structural barriers for actually, you know, hiring people from with an international background.
Right. And that's something, you know, we talked about in the needs for policy. I'm going to move on and ask Brett what his question is, if he would take himself off of mute.
Hi, yeah, I had a quick question that a few times have been mentioned about, you know, attracting the right people, creating that good job. What does, like, how do we attract the people into the job? I really like the point that was made about, you know, phrasing this as a job in sustainability to make a difference. But I was just kind of interested on what the panel had on, you know, attracting those right people for this manual sorting jobs.
It sounds like that's up Tawny's.
Well, I'm going to jump in there first. Sorry.
You can see the enthusiasm on the panel, which I think is fantastic.
So, I mean, you could see a picture of our warehouse behind us, and, you know, we process a lot of textiles. The thing is, it doesn't matter what position someone is fulfilling. They, you know, people want to know that what they're doing makes a difference and that they have a purpose. And so being able to accurately and meaningfully explain to people what they are doing to build a better world actually helps a lot in attracting people and retaining people. You can't not pay them, but, you know, it is a key thing for us.
Yeah, and I'd like to just to riff off of that, what Luke is saying. Traditionally in the Salvation Army, that was one of the anchors for all of our employees, because the work that you're doing is raising funds to help those in our community and yada, yada, right? That was traditionally. It's not quite enough anymore. And the Salvation Army is also, like, we've been doing this for over 100 years. We're a very old brand. And we're finding that not as many people have that nostalgic or that history with our organization like their grandparents did, or like their parents did when they emigrated, or, you know, had tragedies happen in their lives. So we're now using that, and as well as that you're making an environmental difference. We're just on the cusp of doing our strategic plan within our organization, and one of our new pillars is all about sustainability. So we're going to be seeing that rolled out. It takes time, like all of these things do take time to do, but so for us, we're going to be using that two-prong effect about you're helping people in your community, and then you're also helping those in the environment. And will you do it for $14.25 an hour? That's, you know, but we know
That's
that
Canadian.
people want to feel that, well, yeah, but we know that people want to make a difference, and we just got to do a better job of advertising that up front, but also creating that culture internally. And I mentioned earlier that we have so many staff that have been with us for more than 20 years. And I think the reason that we get to keep them, because that's also a key factor here, is that we are constantly including them in the social work that we do. And then we're telling them stories about the impact that we're having on people's lives. And we're going to be weaving in those sustainability and those green initiatives about, you know, we've taken this many cars off the road by the work that we've done as well, and those conversations. So keeping the employees that we currently have engaged is critical. And that's not something that we take lightly either. We do have very high turn traditionally in thrift. I think across the industry, and talking with my other colleagues like Goodwill, St. Vincent de Paul, and some of the other big chains that we have up here in Canada, the turnover is like 25 to 30% in our staffing. But the ones that we do keep, we seem to keep for a very, very long time. So there's information that we can use in there to help our models moving forward.
You know, those are great points. I had just read a study that said that, you know, people are doing, you know, this is sort of the great resignation, and people are going and looking for new jobs. And, you know, when they go to these jobs, they're looking for jobs that have meaning. And when they're finding they get someplace and somebody's promised them something and that meaning really isn't there, then they look at it and go, oh my God, I've made a mistake. So I think that keeping that meaning in those positions and having people understand that they're doing something for the greater good is really important. Jackie has a question. Jackie, you want to take yourself off of mute?
Yes, good morning. Very, very interesting conversation. I'm the Vice President of Retail for Google Industries of San Diego County. So I'm very happy to be a part of this meeting this morning. I have a question for Tony. You know, they have the National Association of Charitable, you know, textiles in Canada. That's not something that, you know, we have here in the United States, but, you know, they have been in place since 2018. And my question is, because she was talking about, you know, be able to get financial support, you know, and I like some of the ideas that we were discussing. Have they been able to make any headway in that area with, you know, with the state or anything as a unity? Because I can see that there is a lot of different organizations, including Goodwill. I'm interested to know.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we did actually, we only opened in late 2018, and then in early 2020, we hired a grant writer who aggressively pursued over 30 different grants for us. The challenge is that we didn't get anything that really helped us leverage and drive forward our association to the pace that we needed. And we believe part of that issue is that many of these grants often go to smaller companies. And here we are, all the big brands of charities together. We kind of look like we've got our stuff together when we actually need support. So we've definitely had challenges in that regard. We're looking at potentially getting other funding. We're always looking at that. It's a struggle. And COVID has really made it a challenge. The organization looks like it's doing fairly well. I could speak for it because I'm the president for the association. But honestly, in the last 2 years, a lot of work has just been put on hold because all of the charities have been focused on their own businesses. So just now we're starting to ramp up and move forward and going to be aggressively looking again for funding. We need to hire staff. We need to have, you know, an executive director and staff on board to really push it all forward. Unfortunately, the charities can't be the ones that fund us because they just don't have the money. So we're looking at that, and we're looking forward to a prosperous near future. COVID just really slowed us down, but we'll get there.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I want to thank the panelists, certainly Shelley for the great work she did and pulling this report together. And then for Luke and Tawny for your, you know, your enthusiasm, your support here today, and the great work that you're doing, right? And being able to get that message out. I think that's something that we really need to do. And I think we've learned that here today. So I appreciate everyone's time. Well, we're going to try and sign off on time. And thank you for joining us. Take care. Bye.
Thank you so much.